Maybe I'm sucking your soul and you don't realize it. And once you escape me, you'll feel like you have your soul back.
In case any of you in the audience have trouble with subtlety and nuance, let's just open this video with a disclaimer. I'm a really harsh critic of Onision, but I'm also a critic of the other critics. I think there's a whole lot of criticism directed toward the guy these days that's ridiculous, off the wall, and in many cases just reflects the fact that the people who have jumped on the bandwagon to harshly condemn the guy now, they weren't really following his story in the last 5 years, so they're not really all that sure of what it is they're condemning and why. So I'm going to try to contribute my own slightly more nuanced and analytical view.
Hey guys, it's Onision here. My life is officially over. All of my videos are demonetized. Now I cannot make hundreds of thousands of dollars off of videos about anorexia and cutting yourself and social justice, the most valuable content on the internet. My videos are needed on YouTube, and I deserve to be paid for it. I worked so hard on all of my videos, and I deserve hundreds of thousands of dollars.
It's rare to hear from an adult man who will admit to you that he prefers the company of stupid women. It's rare to speak to an adult man who will admit to you why it is that he feels more comfortable when romancing, when intimately involved with women whom he feels confident are stupider than he is himself. But it's not uncommon. It's common, but it's everywhere concealed as something shameful. It's a pretty common and pretty damning pattern of human behavior. Those of you who have been following Onision for a few years may have a sore spot in your memory for the video he made when he recorded himself doing an intelligence test, taking an IQ test with two of the women he was romancing. We now know two of the women he was trying to have a long-term triangular sexual relationship with, or perhaps a long-term rectangular sexual relationship with. He took an intelligence test with both Billy, who was already dramatically younger than him, and the even younger Sarah, all of them sitting around. They recorded it as a YouTube video. And you can see Onision absolutely gloating about his supposed intellectual superiority over these very young, and I must say, very silly, very shallow, very fatuous girls whom he'd brought into his life. You know, there are probably some 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds out there who are brilliant, hardworking intellectuals, but those are not the 18-year-olds Onision was pursuing. Those are not the 18-year-olds that Kai was pursuing. So Kai is also known as LAINEYBOT, sometimes referred to as his husband, sometimes as his wife. But the two of them as a couple, they were not pursuing the brightest and the most brilliant. They were not pursuing young women who could challenge them intellectually. Now, I had a friend once, a guy named Charles. We're not friends anymore, but I had a friend once who was an adult man who admitted to me openly that he preferred much younger women, much stupider women, much more naive and jejune women, because he felt that he was very immature himself. He felt that he was very poorly educated himself, and he really struggled to keep his head above water, shall we say, when he was in the company of older and better educated women. So that guy, Charles, I knew him during a period of time when he was single, and he had gone back to university. He didn't finish his university degree, but he was briefly in college classes and then dropped out. And when he was at university, he was meeting, women his own age and women older than himself, who were much more sophisticated, much better educated, self-confident, intelligent. And he struggled with terrible feelings of inadequacy, real intellectual inadequacy. And I would even go so far as to say moral inadequacy. He felt like he was a bad person. There was one situation where there was a woman he met, And he didn't even talk to her. He met her at a grocery store, and then he was filming himself for YouTube in the parking lot, sitting there and recriminating, reflecting on his own sense of inferiority. There's this woman at this grocery store, and he'd love to go and talk to her. He'd love to flirt with her or hit on her or try to have a relationship with her, but he just knows, just from looking at her, that she's better educated than him. She has a better career than he does. She's more mature. She's more well-educated. Now, admittedly, this particular guy, Charles, his diagnosis of the situation is not entirely wrong, because he was an extremely immature person. But the problem is he's the next step he's taking, it's not just incorrect or wrong, it's actually really immoral. He's trying to preserve his own immaturity. He's trying to preserve his own ignorance. He's trying to shield himself from being challenged and stimulated to be a better person by only keeping the company of much younger women who are even more immature and even more poorly educated than himself. And, there's more than one way to respond to this situation, right? You could recognize that for your age, you're not well-read, you're not well-traveled, you're not cosmopolitan, sophisticated, whatever it is. Whatever the list is of intellectual and moral attributes you feel that you're lacking, if you can recognize that you're lacking them, and if you can recognize that you're attracted to and you admire and you respect people who really do have those attributes, obviously you could challenge yourself to develop in that way. You could challenge yourself to, in effect, become a better person, become the kind of person you admire and that you're attracted towards. This habit that both Onision and Kai got into, this cycle of seducing scandalously young women, trying to pull them into their orbit, get them to move into their house, have them employed as part-time babysitters, this pattern that is played out again and again. I think that people have been kind of criticizing it in an overly shallow and simplistic way, because they've failed to look at the extent to which it's really a defensive pattern of behavior. So think about Kai. Kai, formerly known as Lainey, formerly known as female, formerly known as the wife of Onision. Why do you think Kai is doing this? People talk about this as if it's just because she's fascinated with 16-year-olds, right? As if like it's more intellectually or emotionally rewarding for her to have long conversations via Skype with someone who's tremendously immature, inexperienced, and hasn't even graduated from high school yet, right? No, it's a defensive pattern of behavior. Kai, LAINEYBOT, she feels stupid. She feels weak. She feels immoral and bad and poorly educated. She feels like she's someone who has no real accomplishments in her life. So she wants to surround herself with the company of people who are even weaker, even stupider, even more shallow than she is herself. And this same thing, this same pattern plays out with Onision. It's just more tragic and more comical. I mean, Onision doesn't want to spend time with someone who makes him feel bad about spending so many hours on dyeing and coloring his hair. So he brings into his life teenagers who themselves spend a huge amount of time on their hair and makeup, and they all sit around doing hair and makeup together. Onision doesn't want to feel like a bad person because he spends so many hours as a fully grown man playing video games. He repeatedly said that his main happy memory about the relationship with Billy's the girl with blue dyed hair here, was sitting on the couch and playing video games with her. That he felt he had a really meaningful connection to this woman because they played a video game called Earth Defense Force together, and he really hadn't related to anyone else that way. So you have to take that on board with all due gravity. You have to, be willing to witness the evidence that Onision is someone so shallow, that he describes the most meaningful relationships in his life in terms of the video games he played with those people, right? Like, it's not as if there's some greater depth to this guy that he's holding back. It's not like there's a whole other person there that's worth knowing that isn't being isn't being shared with these young women with whom he shared his heart, his soul, his money, his home, with whom he raised his children, and yeah, of course, with whom also he shared his bed. So this is a sick, sad pattern of behavior, but it's ultimately a defensive pattern of behavior. I don't think it's the case that Onision and Kai rapaciously want to go out and seduce the youngest women they possibly can. I think they're both tremendously weak characters. I think on some level, they're aware of their own stupidity. They're aware of their own lack of education, their own lack of sophistication. And they always want to shield themselves against that gnawing sense of self-doubt. They want to insulate themselves against the castigating judgment of the outside world that they probably feel every time they happen to have casual conversation with someone who's the same age that they are. You know, whether it's a conversation with someone who's 24 years old or 33 years old or whatever, you know, whenever they happen to have a casual conversation with someone who's actually sophisticated, actually well-educated, actually ethical, actually going out and making the world a better place in terms of politics and social justice, whatever, someone who actually has accomplishments, actually has ambitions. So again and again, what it is they're looking for on Twitter, on Tumblr, you know, on YouTube, on their chat forums, the women they're going out and recruiting. It's not that they're the youngest of the young. It's that they're the dumbest of the dumb. Because people like Onision and Kai can only feel strong when they surround themselves with people who are weak. They can only feel smart when they're seducing someone so stupid that they can lord their own sense of intellectual superiority over them.
I just sit here with my green screen talking about social justice and teen girls' bodies. I deserve to make hundreds of thousands of dollars.